A few weeks ago, I stood in a crowded room while someone I trusted turned me into a public joke. She wanted an audience. She wanted me small. What she didn't know was that I'd already started something that would make her name the punchline in every room she walks in and out. A few weeks ago, I stood in that room, smiling like nothing could touch me, while she turned my life into her comedy set. But before we get to that night, you need to understand why her words hit differently, and why my silence wasn't defeat. I've always been the kind of person who doesn't fight for attention. If a conversation turned my way, fine. If it didn't, I wasn't going to force it. That's probably why people assumed I wouldn't push back if they crossed a line. And most of the time, they were right. I wasn't the one to start drama. But I was also the kind of person who noticed things, remembered things, filed them away for later. She came into my life through mutual friends. At first, I thought she was just loud. One of those people who has to fill every silence with a story or a joke. And honestly, sometimes I enjoyed it. She had a way of making a room feel alive. But the thing about people like her is that their jokes always need a target. And more often than not, I found myself in her crosshairs. At first, I laughed along. I told myself it didn't matter. A little jab here, a sarcastic comment there. It's just her style, right? But over time, the jokes got sharper, more personal. She'd mention private details I'd never shared publicly, twisting them for laughs. And the crowd, our friends, they'd laugh too, not realizing, or maybe not caring, that every laugh was a knife. There was one time she joked about a mistake I made at work, something only she knew about because I trusted her with it. Everyone laughed. I laughed too. But that night, I went home and thought about how easily she turned my trust into her material. That was the moment the balance shifted. I stopped seeing her as just a friend with a sharp tongue and started seeing her for what she really was. Someone who needed to stand on someone else's back to feel tall. Still, I didn't say anything. I didn't snap back or call her out. Because I'd learned something. When someone like her thinks you're not a threat, they stop guarding themselves. They get sloppy. They reveal things. And that's exactly what I wanted. The night of the big humiliation, the one where she picked the biggest crowd she could find, I was ready. I'd already been watching, collecting, waiting. So when she made her move, I didn't fight back in the moment. I smiled. I looked small. I let her believe she'd won. Little did she know, the real show hadn't even started. The night it happened wasn't supposed to be about me at all. It was a casual gathering, birthday drinks for a mutual friend, the kind of thing where you expect to blend into the background, have a couple of laughs, and go home. The place was crowded, loud, but comfortable. I knew most of the faces, and the ones I didn't know yet were already warming up to me after a few polite conversations. She arrived late, like always, making sure all eyes were on her. She had that knack, a dramatic entrance that made people shift in their seats, smile a little wider, lean in. And when she spotted me, I caught that quick, assessing look. The same one she always gave before deciding whether tonight I was going to be her punchline. We were maybe 20 minutes into her being there when she started. It wasn't subtle. She brought up a story about me, a funny little thing that had happened a few months ago. At least, that's how she introduced it. But the more she talked, the more I realized she wasn't telling it for a laugh between friends. She was performing. I could feel the air change around me. People turned their chairs, their glasses paused halfway to their lips. And then came the twist, the part of the story that only she knew because I'd told her in confidence. She exaggerated, twisted details, and acted it out like some stand-up routine. The laughter started low, then built into waves. I kept my face neutral. Inside, my stomach clenched, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I leaned back in my chair, letting her own voice carry her deeper into it. She thought my silence was surrender, the kind of embarrassment that would keep me quiet. What she didn't notice was how others reacted when she went too far. A couple of people exchanged quick glances. One guy shifted uncomfortably, looking at me like he wasn't sure if he should laugh. That's the thing about public humiliation. When you push it past a certain point, it stops being funny for everyone except the person doing it. Then she hit the punchline, a personal detail twisted so far out of shape that I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. The crowd roared. She took a mock bow. And I smiled. I even clapped once, slow, like I was genuinely entertained. Her grin widened, confident she'd cemented herself as the star of the night. But while she basked in it, I caught something. When she turned to grab her drink, her phone lit up on the table next to me. Just for a second. A notification banner with a name I recognized, and a message that made my pulse jump. It wasn't about me, but it was the kind of thing that could unravel her whole carefully curated image if the wrong person saw it. I didn't touch it. Not yet. I just glanced away like I hadn't noticed, letting the moment pass. She had no idea that in her effort to humiliate me, she'd just handed me something far more valuable than my pride back. That was the night she thought she'd won. But that was just the beginning of my plan. For the rest of that night, I played my role perfectly. I laughed when others laughed. I nodded along to side conversations. I even bought a round of drinks like nothing had happened. But in the back of my mind, that little flash of her phone screen was replaying over and over. The name in the notification wasn't random. I'd heard her mention it before, but always in a way that made it sound off-limits. She'd paint this person as a private friend, someone who wouldn't understand our group's humor. Yet the message I'd glimpsed wasn't exactly friendly. It was short, urgent, and, if my memory was right, completely contradictory to how she described her relationship with that person. The more I thought about it, the more something clicked. She was careful about her image, always keeping certain circles separate. If those circles ever overlapped, things could get messy for her. Messy in the way that could stain her reputation beyond repair. The next day, I didn't reach out to her. I didn't confront her, and I didn't ask questions. Instead, I started paying attention. Quietly, I noticed when she posted on social media and when she went silent. I noticed how her stories sometimes didn't line up with what other people were saying. And I remembered details, tiny inconsistencies that on their own were nothing, but together formed a pattern. A week later, opportunity dropped right into my lap. We were both at another gathering, smaller this time, just a few close friends at someone's apartment. She was in the kitchen, loud as always, telling a story I could practically recite by heart because I'd heard her embellish it before. She left her bag on the couch, her phone half slid out of the front pocket. I didn't take it. I'm not stupid. But when her phone lit up again, I caught another glimpse, same name, this time with a sentence that made my stomach twist in that familiar way. It wasn't illegal, but it was ugly, hypocritical, the kind of thing that could make her social circle turn on her in a heartbeat if they knew. Still, I wasn't ready to act. Not yet. I needed more. I wanted something airtight, something that would make her own actions speak for themselves without me having to explain a thing. So I started asking subtle questions. Not to her, to people who knew her, people who'd seen different sides of her. I learned that she'd been running the same pattern for years. Pick a target, make them the butt of every joke, and keep her own flaws hidden behind a wall of charm and distraction. The more I learned, the more certain I became. She wasn't just mean. She was calculated. And she'd underestimated me because I never gave her the satisfaction of reacting. One night, while scrolling through my feed, I found exactly what I needed. A photo she'd posted weeks ago, casually tagged with that same name. At first glance, it was nothing. But the location tag, combined with what I knew, told a different story entirely. I sat back in my chair, feeling that slow, dangerous satisfaction build. Now, I didn't just have suspicion. I had a thread, and I was going to pull it until her whole image came apart. It didn't take long for the thread to start unraveling. Once I knew what to look for, her entire online presence became a roadmap to the truth. Every caption, every location tag, every offhand comment she'd made in passing. It was all there, hiding in plain sight. One evening, I decided to do a little quiet digging. Nothing illegal, nothing that could be spun against me. Just connecting the dots. I went through her old posts, the public ones anyone could see, and compared them to events I remembered. That's when I noticed something that made my pulse spike. She had been in the same place, at the same time, with the same, off-limits, person more times than she'd ever admit. But it wasn't the overlap that got me. It was the way she'd lied about where she was to other people in our circle. I found screenshots, not mine but posted by friends, of group chats where she'd said she was busy with family or working late, while her own feed showed her smiling in the background of someone else's photo next to him. The more I lined them up, the clearer it became. She was running two versions of herself. In one, she was the sharp-tongued social queen, untouchable and always in control. In the other, she was tangled up in something she didn't want anyone to know about, something that would make her look like a fraud to the very people she thrived on impressing. Then came the real break. A mutual acquaintance, someone I'd always gotten along with, sent me a message late one night. "Hey," they wrote, I think you should see this. Attached was a screenshot of a private conversation between her and that same person whose name had flashed on her phone weeks ago. It wasn't just casual. It was damning. The tone, the language, the context, all of it screamed hypocrisy. She had spent months mocking me, painting herself as above reproach, all while doing things that would make her the punchline in any room if people found out. I remember staring at that screenshot, my hands gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles ached. It wasn't joy I felt. Not yet. It was something heavier, colder, the confirmation that I hadn't imagined any of it. She really was who I thought she was. And now I had proof. Still, I didn't rush. A direct attack would just make me look bitter, petty. That wasn't the game I wanted to play. No, if I did this right, I wouldn't have to say a single word. Her own actions would take center stage, and the audience she craved so much would be the ones turning on her. That night, lying in bed, I went over it all in my head. The humiliation, the smirks, the way she'd soaked up the laughter at my expense. And for the first time, I allowed myself to imagine the look on her face when the tables turned. It wasn't about revenge for the sake of revenge anymore. It was about balance, and I was ready to tip the scales. But first, I needed a stage big enough for her own performance to destroy her. The thing about people like her is that their secrets never stay neatly in one box. Once you find one crack, you start seeing the whole structure shift. And that's exactly what happened. In the days after getting that screenshot, I started noticing smaller details I'd ignored before. Her mood swings weren't random. They lined up with when that off-limits person was in town. The sudden bursts of generosity towards certain friends, followed by weeks of cold shoulders, made more sense now. She wasn't just navigating social circles. She was managing a web of lies so tangled that one wrong move could make the whole thing collapse. I hadn't planned to involve anyone else, but sometimes information has a way of finding you. One afternoon, I got a call from a friend who worked at a local event venue. They'd seen her there recently, and not in the way she'd want publicly known. "You didn't hear it from me," they said, "but she's been here with him a lot." And let's just say they weren't hiding. It clicked. This wasn't just about some private fling or hypocrisy. It was about reputation currency. She'd built her status on being the untouchable one, the one who could drag others through the mud while staying spotless herself. But here she was, making the kind of mistakes that would be social suicide if exposed. The real punch, though, came from somewhere I never expected. An old friend of hers, someone who'd quietly stepped back from the group months ago, reached out to me. "I think I know why you've been keeping quiet," they said. "And I think you should see what she sent me before we stopped talking." They forwarded me a chain of messages. In them, she wasn't just mocking me. She was mocking everyone. Every single person in our circle had a nickname, a caricature. She talked about us like characters in some low-budget soap opera she was directing, exaggerating our flaws, twisting private confessions into entertainment for her and a few select people. Reading my own entry was surreal. It was almost word for word the embarrassing story she'd told that night, but nastier, meaner, and sent weeks before she performed it in front of everyone. This wasn't off-the-cuff cruelty. This was planned, rehearsed. By the time I finished reading, my anger wasn't sharp anymore. It was calm, precise. She had given me everything I needed to take her down without ever lifting my voice. And then, as if the universe was conspiring to make my work easier, she made a mistake. A big one. She posted a story on social media, a quick video clip from yet another event, and didn't realize she'd accidentally tagged the wrong location. The place was unmistakable, and the timestamp overlapped perfectly with one of her "I'm homesick" excuses from a group chat I'd been in. It was like watching someone build their own gallows and invite people to watch. I saved it, along with everything else. Now, I didn't just have a scandal. I had a narrative, and if I played it right, she'd be the one telling it, without realizing she was sealing her own fate. By the time I had everything collected, the screenshots, the messages, the location tags, I knew I could end her social standing with a single move. But knowing and doing are two very different things. For a few nights, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every possible outcome. Part of me wanted to drop everything at once. A clean, brutal reveal that would leave her scrambling to explain. But another part of me, the colder, more deliberate part, wanted to savor this. To make sure it wasn't just a hit, but a collapse. There was also the question of timing. Too soon, and it would look like I was still stinging from her public humiliation. Too late, and she might sense something coming and fortify her defenses. I needed the moment to feel organic, like the universe itself had decided it was her turn. In the meantime, I kept my distance. No direct confrontation, no subtle jabs online. Silence is unsettling for people like her. They thrive on reaction, on knowing they've gotten under your skin. I gave her nothing, and the longer I stayed quiet, the more she started to circle back toward me. Casual texts, little just checking in messages, as if testing the water. That's when the doubt tried to creep in. I'd ask myself, was I really going to do this? Was it worth it to burn the bridge completely? But then I'd remember the heat in my face the night she mocked me in front of everyone. The way she'd smirked as if my humiliation was her crowning achievement. And I'd feel that steady resolve lock back into place. I started mapping it out like a strategist. Step 1, find the perfect setting. It had to be public, but not chaotic, somewhere our shared social circle would be paying attention. Step 2, make sure the information reached them without my fingerprints all over it. Step 3, let her own words do the work. No commentary, no editorializing, just the truth, in her handwriting, her voice, her posts. The opportunity came in the form of an upcoming engagement party for a mutual friend. The guest list was packed with people from every side of her life. Perfect. One carefully timed conversation, one accidental forward of the right screenshots to the right person, and the ripple effect would take care of the rest. But even as the plan crystallized, I felt that strange undercurrent. Not guilt exactly, but a quiet recognition that once I set this in motion, there was no undoing it. She wouldn't just lose her reputation, she'd lose control. And someone like her doesn't survive without control. By the week of the party, I had every detail locked. I even rehearsed the moment in my head, not because I'd be speaking, but because I wanted my expression to be unreadable. No triumph, no malice, just the same calm face she saw when she thought she'd beaten me. She wanted to stage the night she humiliated me. Now, I was about to give her one, and she'd never see the trap until the curtain fell. The engagement party was held at one of those sleek rooftop venues with glass railings and just enough lighting to make everyone look like they belonged in a lifestyle magazine. It was the kind of place where appearances mattered, perfect for what I had planned. I arrived early, not to stake out a spot, but to settle myself. My goal wasn't to look like someone plotting revenge. I wanted to look like I was just another guest, enjoying the view, sipping a drink, making polite conversation. Blending in meant no one would remember where the spark came from later. She arrived in her usual fashion, late enough to draw attention, dressed in a way that made her the unspoken focal point of the room. I caught her scanning the crowd, and when our eyes met, she gave me that easy, condescending smile. The kind of smile that said, "I'm still in control." She had no idea. Step 1 was already in motion before she even walked in. Earlier that day, I'd sent a short, innocuous message to someone in our circle, someone I knew couldn't keep a secret if their life depended on it. It was just a screenshot. No context, no commentary. Her words, in her own messages, mocking people who would be in that very room tonight, including the recipient. The beauty of it was that I didn't have to tell anyone to spread it around. I knew human nature would do the rest. By the time she'd been in the room for half an hour, I could already see the first signs, little clusters of people forming, glances in her direction, whispers behind champagne glasses. She noticed, of course. At first, she brushed it off, turning her charm up a notch, laughing a little louder, holding court like always. But as the minutes passed, her smile started to stiffen. Conversations she approached fizzled out. People excused themselves mid-sentence. I stayed out of it entirely, chatting with people on the other side of the venue, never looking her way for too long. I didn't want her to connect the dots yet. Then, halfway through the night, I saw the moment it hit her. She'd approached a group, all of whom had clearly just been talking about her. One of them, emboldened by whatever they'd just read, asked her a pointed question, one that tied directly back to the messages I'd leaked. Her laugh faltered, just for a second, before she recovered. She played it off. She always did. And for a brief moment, I thought maybe she'd wriggle her way out of this like she always had. But as the night went on, it became clear the damage was done. She left earlier than I'd ever seen her leave an event, her shoulders tight, her phone in hand. Walking out of that party, I could have stopped there. I had humiliated her without saying a word, and the whispers would follow her for weeks. It felt clean, controlled. But as I stepped into the cool night air, I realized something. This wasn't the climax. It was just the intermission. If I'd learned anything about gossip, it's that you can't control where it goes once it's out. You can guess, you can anticipate, but once the match is struck, the fire takes its own path. 2 days after the engagement party, I started getting messages from people I barely spoke to, acquaintances from years back, old coworkers, even a cousin who lived in another city. All of them had some version of the story, twisted and embellished in ways I hadn't planned. The screenshots I'd leaked had gone far beyond our social circle. At first, I was fine with it. The further it spread, the harder it would be for her to bury it. But then I started noticing something I hadn't accounted for: collateral damage. People who had nothing to do with her games were getting dragged into the conversation. Friends of friends were being scrutinized just for being in the same photo with her. And she didn't disappear quietly. Instead of retreating, she went on the offensive. Subtle at first, vague social media posts about fake friends and jealous people who can't handle confidence. Then she started dropping hints in her stories that she knew who was behind it, without naming me outright. It didn't take long before mutual friends started feeling the tension. Some messaged me directly, asking if it was true that I'd started all this. I deflected, stayed calm, told them I had no idea what she was talking about. But inside, I felt the shift. She was trying to flip the script, paint herself as the victim. The real complication came when one of the people she'd mocked, someone with a much shorter fuse than me, decided to take matters into their own hands. They posted a full compilation of her worst comments, pairing each one with a photo or a clip of the person she was talking about. No anonymity, no subtlety. It was brutal. That post exploded. Within hours, it had hundreds of shares and comments, most of them gleefully piling on. But in the chaos, my original intention, a quiet, clean takedown, was gone. This was now a feeding frenzy. I hadn't wanted to destroy her completely. I just wanted balance. But watching her try to defend herself against an entire crowd was unsettling. She was still playing her role, trying to laugh it off, but the cracks were obvious. And the more she talked, the worse it got. Screenshots kept surfacing, some I'd never even seen before. By the end of the week, it wasn't just our circle whispering, it was strangers. She'd become a cautionary tale, the kind of name people dropped when warning others about two-faced friends. And here was the part one hadn't anticipated. People started looking at me differently. Not accusing, exactly, but wary. Like maybe I was capable of more than I let on. Like they were wondering if I had dirt on them too. I'd lit the fire. But now it was burning hotter and wider than I'd ever planned. And the next move could either cement everything or burn me along with her. By the second week, the situation had gone from messy to unrecognizable. What had started as a calculated strike had become an uncontrollable storm, and I could feel myself standing closer and closer to the edge. People were still sending me updates, screenshots, posts, voice notes of conversations where her name came up. At first, it felt like confirmation that my plan had worked. But then, buried among the messages, I found something different: my own name. Someone had decided that if she could be exposed, maybe I could too. A blurry photo of me at the engagement party surfaced with a caption hinting that I knew more than I was saying. Comments spiraled into speculation. Was I the one who started it all? Did I have more files on other people? The worst part wasn't the rumor itself. It was realizing how quickly the crowd could shift its focus. All it would take was one wrong move, one piece of gossip twisted the right way, and I'd be the one on the defensive. Meanwhile, she had gone quiet. Not the performative quiet of a social media detox, but the kind that feels like the calm before a storm. No posts, no stories, no public appearances. Just silence. It was unnerving. Mutual friends started avoiding me at gatherings. Conversations would pause when I walked into the room. Even people who had laughed with me about her weeks ago now seemed cautious. It was as if the entire circle had realized that if I could dismantle her so quietly, maybe I could do the same to anyone. I told myself I didn't care, that this was the price of setting things right. But late at night, lying awake, I'd feel the weight of it pressing down. I'd think about the friends I might lose, the bridges that would never be rebuilt. And for the first time, I asked myself, had I gone too far? The turning point came when I got a single-line message from her. We need to talk. No accusation, no sarcasm. Just that. I stared at it for a long time, wondering what she wanted. An apology? A confrontation? A truce? Part of me wanted to ignore it entirely. Another part, the same part that had driven me to start all this, wanted to see her face when we spoke. But deep down, I knew this wasn't going to be a conversation. It was going to be a battle. And if she'd been silent this long, it meant she'd been preparing. I had one advantage left. I still controlled the narrative. But if I mishandled whatever came next, I could lose it all in a single night. My plan had started as a clean, precise cut. Now, it felt like I was holding a knife in the middle of a riot, and the next move could decide whether I walked away unscathed or went down with her. We agreed to meet in a small coffee shop on the edge of downtown. Neutral territory, quiet enough to talk, public enough that neither of us could completely lose control. I arrived early, choosing a table in the back where I could see the door. When she walked in, she didn't look like the queen of the room anymore. No dramatic entrance, no calculated smile. Just a tight jaw and eyes that scanned the place until they landed on me. She sat down without a word. For a moment, we just stared at each other. I let the silence stretch, waiting to see who would speak first. It was her. "You think you're clever," she said finally, voice low but steady. "But you've made a mistake." I didn't answer. She leaned forward. "You lit the match, but you're not the one controlling the fire anymore. People are coming to me with things about you." She paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "Things you wouldn't want out there." I almost laughed. It was such a transparent bluff, except I couldn't be sure it was entirely empty. She'd been digging, no doubt about it. And she was right about one thing. The fire had spread beyond my control. "What do you want?" I asked. Her lips curled into something halfway between a smirk and a sneer. "You stop feeding it, and I stop digging. We call it even." Even. As if she could erase the months of humiliation with a handshake. As if all the people she'd mocked, belittled, and betrayed would suddenly forget. I took a slow sip of my coffee, then set the cup down carefully. "The difference between us," I said, "is that you needed an audience to hurt me. I don't need one to end you." She froze, just for a second, and I saw the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. I leaned in, keeping my voice calm. "You've been running this game for years. I'm not your only target, and I'm not the only one with proof. You want me to stop? Fine. But the second you try to twist this back on me, every single thing I've kept in reserve goes public. And you know I'm not bluffing." Her hands clenched in her lap. She was weighing it, whether to call me on it or walk away. In the end, she chose the latter. She stood, grabbed her bag, and said, "You'll regret this." I watched her go, the bell over the door chiming as it closed behind her. Maybe she was right. Maybe I would regret it. But as I sat there, finishing my coffee, I felt something I hadn't felt since the night she first turned me into a punchline: control. The whispers about her weren't going to stop overnight. She could post, deny, spin it however she wanted. But the truth was out now, in too many places to contain. She'd wanted a stage. Now, every room she walked into was one, and the spotlight was never going to feel safe again. In the weeks that followed, the dust didn't settle, it just shifted. The frenzy of posts and whispers slowed, but it never stopped. People stopped openly talking about her in the middle of gatherings, yet you could feel it under the surface. The glance, the pause in conversation, the slight change in tone when her name came up. She tried to rebuild. I saw it in the carefully curated photos she started posting again, the sudden surge of self-love quotes, the thinly veiled captions about rising above negativity. But there was a new stiffness to her smile. The sparkle she'd used to hold a crowd wasn't there anymore, because now every laugh around her carried a question: are they laughing with me? Or at me? For me, life didn't go back to what it was either. Some people kept their distance, unsure of where my lines were now. A few friendships quietly faded, maybe because they didn't want to be in the blast radius, maybe because they realized they'd laughed a little too hard the night she humiliated me. But there were others, people who came up to me privately to say they'd seen what she was like for years, but had never dared speak out. They weren't cheering for the drama. They were just glad someone had finally cut through the illusion. The funny thing was, I never got the satisfaction I thought I would. I'd imagined feeling triumphant, maybe even vindicated. Instead, what I felt was clear. Like I'd finally set something down I'd been carrying too long. One evening, months later, I ran into her by accident at a cafe. No crowd, no mutual friends, just the two of us in line for coffee. She glanced at me, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked away first. No smirk, no comment, nothing. And in that moment, I realized something important. She wasn't my problem anymore. I'd taken back the power she'd tried to strip from me, and in doing so, I'd broken the hold she had over my life. Whatever happened to her reputation from here on out was in her hands, not mine. Walking out into the evening air with my coffee, I thought back to that night at the party when she'd made me the center of her act. I remembered the laughter, the way my face burned, the way I'd smiled to hide it. And I thought about how different my smile was now. Small, calm, unshakable. People like her thrive on control, on deciding who gets to stand tall and who gets cut down. And maybe I'd become a little like her in the end, strategic, careful with my moves. But there was one crucial difference. I didn't need to tear someone down to keep my place. The whispers about her never stopped completely. Every so often, I'd hear a new story, see a new post, catch a familiar shift in the air when her name came up. She used to be the one who controlled the room. Now, she was just another story people told, one with a punchline she'd written herself. And that was enough for me.